Now let's begin. Calvin Brewer pulled his truck into the long driveway of the Stokes estate, already running 15 minutes late. His phone buzzed again, another missed call from Elaine. He'd deal with his wife later. Right now, he just needed to pick up 7-year-old Mason from his grandfather's house and get home before the traffic turned into a nightmare. The October sun hung low, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Calvin had never liked this place. Reginald Stokes had money, old money, the kind that came with expectations and judgment, the kind that looked down on a construction foreman who worked with his hands. But Elaine had insisted Mason spend the weekend here while they dealt with the kitchen renovation. Calvin rounded the final bend, and his foot slammed on the brake. 12 police cruisers formed a perimeter around the colonial house. Officers crouched behind open doors, weapons drawn. A SWAT van sat in the middle of the circular drive, its back doors open, revealing tactical gear and armed personnel suiting up. His heart stopped. Mason. Calvin threw the truck into park and sprinted toward the house. Mason, my son is in there. A uniformed officer intercepted him, palm pressed against Calvin's chest. Step back, sir. This is an active situation. Active situation? That's my son. Calvin's voice cracked. He tried to push past, but the officer held firm. Sir, I need you to wait. The officer's eyes narrowed. Did you say your son? Mason Brewer. He's 7 years old. He's staying with his grandfather, Reginald Stokes. What the hell is happening? The officer's face drained of color. He grabbed his radio. Captain, we have the father here. The boy's father. Static crackled. A woman's voice responded. Bring him to command. Now. The officer guided Calvin to a mobile command center parked near the property's edge. Inside, Captain Judy Mathis stood over a table covered in blueprints and photographs. She looked up as Calvin entered, her expression grave. Mr. Brewer, I'm Captain Mathis. I need you to stay calm. Where's my son? He's alive. He's inside the house, and he's unharmed. But we have a situation. Calvin's hands balled into fists. What kind of situation? Mathis pulled out a tablet, her fingers moving across the screen. 3 hours ago, we received a 911 call from this address. A young boy, identifying himself as Mason Brewer, called saying he found something in the basement. Something bad. The call disconnected abruptly. Calvin's stomach twisted. And when officers arrived, Reginald Stokes refused entry. He claimed everything was fine, that Mason was playing a prank. But the boy's call was genuine. We could hear fear in his voice. We obtained an emergency warrant. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Mr. Brewer, when our initial entry team went in, they found something that changed this from a welfare check to a federal investigation. Stop dancing around it. What did they find? Mathis turned the tablet toward him. The screen showed thermal imaging of the house. Calvin could make out the normal layout, living room, kitchen, bedrooms. But beneath the foundation, a massive structure glowed with heat signatures. It stretched far beyond the house's footprint, extending at least 100 feet in multiple directions. What am I looking at? An underground facility. We estimate it's been under construction for at least 8 years, based on permit records we've pulled. Your father-in-law has been building it in secret, claiming it was a wine cellar expansion to the county. 8 years. The number hit Calvin like a punch. He and Elaine had been married for 8 years. Mason had been born 7 years ago. His mind raced, connecting dots he didn't want to connect. A wine cellar doesn't need SWAT, Calvin said, his voice hard. Mathis swiped to another image. This one showed a floor plan reconstruction based on ground-penetrating radar. The underground complex had multiple chambers, corridors, and what looked like reinforced rooms. No, it doesn't. Mr. Brewer, we believe your father-in-law has been operating an illegal facility. We're not sure of its exact purpose yet, but our initial entry team reported signs of manufacturing equipment, chemical storage, and... She hesitated. Evidence of long-term occupancy by multiple individuals. Calvin's blood ran cold. Occupancy. We found personal belongings. Clothing. Items that suggest people have been living down there. Possibly against their will. The world tilted. Calvin gripped the edge of the table. My son called 911 from inside. Where is he now? That's the problem. After we secured the upper floors, Stokes retreated into the facility with Mason. He sealed the entrance from the inside. The structure is reinforced concrete and steel. We can't breach it without significant risk. And based on what our team saw before he locked it down, Mathis pulled up another image. Calvin stared at a photograph taken by the entry team. The entrance to the underground facility wasn't just a door. It was a vault entrance, the kind you'd see in a bank. Surrounding it were what looked like sensors and equipment he didn't recognize. Our explosives expert says the entrance is rigged. If we force it, there's a chance of collapse or worse. We also detected chemical compounds in the air samples. We don't know if he has any fail-safes built in. So you're telling me my son is trapped in an underground bunker with a man who's been doing God knows what down there, and you can't get him out? We're working on it. We've established communication. Stokes is talking, but he's not making sense. He keeps saying something about the work and how no one understands. He's demanded to speak with his daughter, Elaine. Calvin's jaw tightened. Where's my wife? We've been trying to reach her. She's not answering her phone. Calvin pulled out his cell. 7 missed calls from Elaine, all from this morning. Before the 911 call. Before everything went to hell. He dialed. It went straight to voicemail. Let me talk to him, Calvin said. Mr. Brewer. He's got my son. Let me talk to him. Mathis studied him for a long moment, then nodded to a communications officer. The man handed Calvin a radio. Mr. Stokes, this is Calvin Brewer. I'm here to take Mason home. Static. Then a voice Calvin had heard 1,000 times at family dinners. Always polite, always measured, always condescending. But now it carried an edge of something else, desperation. Calvin, I'm disappointed. I expected you to understand, of all people. You build things. You know about foundations, about creating something that lasts. Let my son go. He's perfectly safe. Safer than he's ever been. This place, Calvin, it's a masterpiece. 8 years of planning. 8 years of construction. Do you know how hard it is to build something of this magnitude without anyone knowing? Calvin forced himself to stay calm. What have you been building, Reginald? A long pause. Freedom. True freedom. The kind that comes from being completely self-sufficient. The kind that requires resources. Skills. Labor. Labor, Calvin repeated. His eyes met Mathis's. She nodded grimly. I've been preparing for the collapse. When society falls apart, when the system fails, those who are prepared will survive. Will thrive. I've built paradise, Calvin. A sustainable ecosystem. Energy generation. Water filtration. Food production. Everything necessary for long-term survival. Using people you kidnapped. Recruited, Reginald corrected. People who had nowhere else to go. People who society had discarded. I gave them purpose. I gave them shelter and food and meaningful work. Calvin's free hand clenched into a fist. Where's Elaine? My daughter understands. She's always understood. Why do you think she encouraged these visits? Why do you think Mason spent so much time here? I was preparing him, Calvin. Educating him. He's a bright boy. He would have been ready. The past tense sent ice through Calvin's veins. Would have been. He found the entrance. He wasn't supposed to. Not yet. Not for another few years. But children are curious, and I suppose I got careless. I thought the wine cellar door would be enough of a deterrent. Reginald's voice turned bitter. He saw things he shouldn't have seen, asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. So you locked him down there. I'm protecting him. When they come in, and they will come in, they'll destroy everything. Years of work, gone. They'll call it kidnapping, call it slavery, call it insanity. They don't understand vision. But Mason will be safe with me until we can leave through the alternate exit. Calvin's mind raced. Alternate exit. That's why SWAT couldn't just wait him out. There's nowhere to run, Reginald. You'd be surprised what money and planning can accomplish. I have vehicles staged. Identities prepared. In 48 hours, Mason and I will be somewhere warm, somewhere safe, and the authorities will still be trying to cut through my door. 48 hours. Calvin looked at Mathis. She was already gesturing to her team, mouthing orders. I won't let you take my son. You don't have a choice. Goodbye, Calvin. Take care of my daughter. She's going to need you. The line went dead. Calvin stood there, radio in hand, fury and fear warring inside him. 8 years. 8 years of Sundays, dinners, and holidays and family photos. And the whole time, Reginald Stokes had been building a prison under his house. Using people. Planning to take Mason. And Elaine, his wife, the woman he'd built a life with, she knew. She had to have known. Mr. Brewer, Mathis said gently, we're going to get your son out. I promise you. Calvin looked at her, at the command center full of people and equipment and good intentions. They were going to try. They were going to do their best. But Calvin knew something they didn't. He knew buildings. He knew construction. He knew foundations and load-bearing walls and structural weaknesses. And he knew men like Reginald Stokes. Men who thought their money and their plans made them untouchable. Reginald had made a mistake. He'd built his paradise on property Calvin had surveyed 8 years ago, back when Elaine had first asked him to take a look at her father's place, to give advice on some foundation issues. Calvin remembered those blueprints. He remembered the layout. And he remembered something Reginald didn't know he knew. "Captain," Calvin said, his voice steady now, purposeful. "I need to see your building schematics. All of them. And I need to make a call." Mathis raised an eyebrow. "To who?" "Someone who can get us inside that facility without Reginald knowing we're coming." The sun had set by the time Calvin finished his 4th cup of coffee. The command center had become his workspace. Blueprints and property records spread across every available surface. Captain Mathis watched him with a mixture of curiosity and concern as he traced lines on the old foundation plans, comparing them to the new thermal imaging. "Here," Calvin said, tapping a spot on the western edge of the underground complex. This was the original basement foundation. Reginald expanded outward, but he had to work around the existing water main and gas line. "See this corridor?" Mathis leaned in. "The one running parallel to the property line? It's too close to the city utilities." He couldn't have reinforced it the same way as the rest of the structure without hitting the lines. He had to compromise, probably used lighter materials, maybe even left access panels for maintenance. "You think it's a weak point?" "I think it's our way in." A tactical officer named Bradley Keller joined them. "Even if you're right, we'd have to excavate from the surface. That could take days, and it'll be loud. Stokes will know we're coming." Calvin shook his head. "We don't dig from above. We go lateral. There's a storm drain system running along this side of the property. It was part of the original subdivision development in the 50s. The tunnels are still there. I've worked in them on other projects in the area." He pulled up a municipal engineering map on the tablet. "This access point is 2 properties over. We can enter here, follow the storm drain west, and it should run within a few feet of Stokes's compound. If I'm right about his construction compromises, we punch through from the drain into his corridor." Mathis studied the map. "That's a hell of a lot of assumptions. It's the only shot we have. You try to breach the main entrance, people could die. Mason could die. This way, we come in from a direction he's not monitoring, we don't trigger his failsafes, and we get my son out before he realizes what's happening." Mathis looked at Keller. The tactical officer ran calculations in his head, then slowly nodded. "It could work. We'd need ground-penetrating radar to confirm the drain's integrity, cutting equipment, probably thermal imaging to know what's on the other side before we breach." "How long?" Calvin asked. "To gather equipment and position the team?" "For hours, minimum. Could be 6. Calvin checked his watch. 10 p.m. 6 hours would put them at 4 in the morning. Reginald had said 48 hours, but Calvin didn't trust that timeline. The man was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He had to know time was running out. "Mr. Brewer," Mathis said carefully, "I appreciate your knowledge, but you understand you can't be part of the entry team." "The hell I can't. You're emotionally involved. You're not trained. And if something goes wrong, I need to be there for my son." Calvin met her eyes. "I'm not asking permission, Captain. I'm telling you I'm going in. You want my help with the entry point, you let me through that wall." Mathis was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. "Against my better judgment, fine. But you follow orders, you wear a vest, and if any member of my team tells you to stay back, you stay back. Clear. Clear. Good. Keller, get the equipment together. I want radar confirmation within the hour." She turned back to Calvin. "In the meantime, we need to talk about your wife." Calvin's expression hardened. "What about her?" "We tracked her cell phone. It pinged off a tower near the Canadian border 3 hours ago. She's running, Mr. Brewer. And given the timing, I'd say she knew this was coming." Calvin felt something inside him crack. Part of him had hoped, desperately hoped, that Elaine was innocent. That she'd been manipulated, lied to, kept in the dark like he had been. But running meant guilt. Running meant she'd chosen her father over their son. "Do you want us to bring her in?" Mathis asked. Calvin thought about 8 years of marriage. 8 years of lies. He thought about Mason, 7 years old, trapped underground with a madman. He thought about Sunday dinners where Elaine had smiled and chatted while knowing what her father kept hidden beneath their feet. After we get Mason out, Calvin said quietly, then you bring her in. I want to look her in the eye when you do. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Don't trust the police. They'll kill him. There's another way. A friend. Calvin stared at the message. He showed it to Mathis. Could be Stokes, she said. Trying to isolate you, make you act irrationally. Or it could be someone who knows more than we do. Calvin typed back. Who is this? The response came immediately. Someone who was down there. Someone who got out. The alternate exit isn't what you think. Meet me. Alone. Mathis reached for the phone. Let me trace this. Calvin pulled it back. If this person knows about the alternate exit, we need that information. It's a trap. Maybe. But what if it's not? Calvin looked at the tactical plans, at the storm drain entry point he'd identified. What if there's something we're missing? Something that'll get Mason killed? Mathis's jaw tightened. Where does he want to meet? Another text appeared. Old Henderson Mill. 30 minutes. Come alone, or I disappear. The mill was 15 minutes away, an abandoned textile factory from the 60s. Calvin had done some demo work there years ago. It was isolated, dangerous, and definitely the kind of place you'd choose for an ambush. I'm going, Calvin said. Like hell you are. Captain, if this person has information that saves my son, I have to take that chance. And if Stokes sent this to lure you away while he makes his move? Calvin hadn't thought of that. His mind was spinning, exhaustion and adrenaline making it hard to think clearly. Mathis made a decision. Fine. You go. But you wear a wire, and I have a team in the area. At the first sign of trouble, we extract you. Deal. 20 minutes later, Calvin pulled up to the Henderson Mill. The old brick building loomed in the darkness, windows broken, walls covered in graffiti. His truck's headlights cut through the overgrown parking lot, illuminating rusted equipment and scattered debris. The wire Mathis had taped to his chest felt heavy. She'd promised backup would stay a quarter-mile out, close enough to respond, but far enough not to spook his contact. Calvin killed the engine and stepped out. The October wind carried the smell of decay and rust. You came. The voice came from the shadows near the mill's entrance. Calvin turned. A man stepped into the moonlight, thin, maybe 35, with the haunted look of someone who'd seen things they couldn't forget. He wore dirty work clothes and walked with a limp. Who are you? Calvin asked. My name's Theodore Downs. Most people call me Theo. Before I disappeared 4 years ago. Calvin's blood chilled. You were down there. In Stokes's facility. For 3 years and 8 months. I got out 6 months ago. Been trying to figure out how to expose him without getting killed. Theo's eyes were hollow. I heard about today on the police scanner I keep. Heard about your son. I had to reach out. Why didn't you go to the police? Because Stokes has insurance. That's what he called it. Insurance. Theo pulled a crumpled photograph from his pocket and handed it to Calvin. In the dim light, Calvin could make out several people in the photo, men and women in work clothes, standing in what looked like an underground facility. They weren't smiling. They looked exhausted, defeated. There are 11 people still down there, Theo said. People he took. People who disappeared and no one looked for because they were homeless or addicts or runaways. He worked them like slaves, building his compound, maintaining his systems. And he told every single one of them the same thing. If police ever raided the place, he'd flood the lower chambers. Calvin's stomach dropped. Flood them. There's an underground spring that runs beneath the property. Stokes tapped into it for his water supply, but he also engineered it as a kill switch. If he triggers it, the lower levels fill with water in under 5 minutes. The people down there, they're kept in those lower levels. They'll drown. Jesus Christ. That's not all. He's got your son, but he's also got collateral. He told me once, when he was drunk, that he always kept insurance. Children of important people. People who could make problems go away if they needed to. Theo's voice cracked. I didn't believe him until I saw the surveillance footage. He's been taking kids, not permanently, just for weekends, visits, photographing them in the facility, creating evidence that their families knew, that they were complicit. Calvin felt sick. Mason's weekend visits. He's probably got dozens of photos of your boy down there, dated over years. If you ever try to speak out, he'd ruin you. Make it look like you were part of it. The full scope of Reginald's plan crystallized in Calvin's mind. It wasn't just a bunker. It wasn't just slave labor. It was a comprehensive system of control, blackmail, and preparation. The man was a monster. The alternate exit, Calvin said. Where does it go? 3 miles north, into the state forest. There's a camouflaged vehicle bay with an SUV staged. Full tank, supplies, cash. He could be gone before anyone finds it. Theo stepped closer. But here's what the cops don't know. The exit tunnel runs right through the lower detention area. If he's planning to leave, he'll have to pass through where the people are kept. And if he thinks he's about to lose everything, he'll flood it. Theo nodded. The trigger is manual. A valve he has to physically open. If your SWAT team goes in loud, if he feels trapped, he'll kill them all rather than let them testify. I've seen what he's capable of. He's not just arrogant. He's a true believer. He genuinely thinks he's building something important, and anyone who gets in the way is expendable. Calvin processed this. The storm drain plan wouldn't work, not if it risked spooking Reginald into mass murder. What do you suggest? Theo pulled out a hand-drawn map. I know the facility layout by heart. I helped build it. There's a ventilation shaft for the lower levels. Stokes needed it for air circulation. It's accessible from the surface, hidden in the woods about 200 yards behind the house. It's not on any blueprints because he didn't permit it. It's just a steel grate over a 40-foot vertical shaft. Can someone fit through it? One person at a time. It drops into a maintenance corridor that's usually empty. From there, you can access the lower detention area without triggering any of the main security. You get in quiet, you secure the hostages, and you jam that flood valve. Then the cops can breach loud, and Stokes has no leverage. Calvin studied the map. It was risky, maybe insane, but it made sense. Why are you helping me? Calvin asked. Why not just give this to the police? Theo's expression darkened. Because I want Stokes to suffer. The cops will arrest him, sure. But legal proceedings take time, and monsters like him, they find ways to slip through. Rich lawyers, technicalities, plea deals. I want him to know what it's like to lose everything, to be helpless, to watch his perfect plan collapse. He met Calvin's eyes. And I figure a father fighting for his son might be willing to make sure justice is served. Real justice. Calvin understood. Theo wasn't just offering help. He was offering partnership in something darker than a rescue operation. I'll do whatever it takes to save Mason, Calvin said carefully. Then we need to move. The SWAT team is probably already gathering their equipment for that storm drain idea. We need to get in before they make their move and spook him. Calvin thought about Mathis, about the wire he was wearing, about the team waiting a quarter-mile away. He thought about doing this the right way, the legal way. Then he thought about Mason, 7 years old, surrounded by the evidence of his grandfather's madness. He thought about 11 people who'd been worked as slaves for years. He thought about Elaine, running toward Canada, choosing her father's secrets over their family. Calvin reached under his shirt and tore off the wire. He dropped it on the ground. Let's go get my son. Calvin followed Theo's pickup truck through winding back roads, his phone silenced in the cup holder. By now, Mathis would have realized the wire went dead. She'd be sending teams to the mill. But they'd be too late. Calvin was committed now, for better or worse. Theo pulled off onto a maintenance road that barely qualified as a path, branches scraping against Calvin's truck as they drove deeper into the woods behind the Stokes estate. After a quarter mile, Theo stopped and killed his lights. Calvin parked behind him and got out. The forest was dark, illuminated only by a sliver of moon through the trees. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of police lights from the front of Reginald's property. It's another 100 yards on foot, Theo whispered. Stay quiet. Stokes has motion sensors in some areas, but they're mostly covering approach angles from the house. They moved through the underbrush, Theo navigating with practiced ease. Calvin followed, his construction workers' build making stealth difficult, but he managed. His mind focused on one thing, Mason. Everything else, his marriage, his rage, his moral compass, could wait. Theo stopped and pointed. At first, Calvin saw nothing. Then his eyes adjusted, and he made out a square metal grate, maybe 3 feet on each side, nestled in a slight depression. Dead leaves had been arranged over it, nearly perfect camouflage. This is it, Theo said, pulling the leaves away. The shaft drops 40 feet straight down. There are rungs built into the wall, but they're old. Test each one before you trust it with your weight. Calvin knelt and peered into the darkness. He couldn't see the bottom. What's down there? Maintenance corridor, like I said, about 50 feet long, connects the detention area to the main complex. There's usually no one in at this time of night. Stokes keeps his workers locked in their cells after 9 p.m. Theo handed Calvin a small flashlight. Red lens. Won't show up on cameras as easily. You're not coming? Can't. I go down there, and Stokes sees me on security feeds. He'll know something's wrong. He thinks I'm long gone, maybe dead. But you're the concerned father. Even if he spots you, he might hesitate, try to talk. That gives you seconds you wouldn't otherwise have. Calvin tested the grate. It was heavy steel, but old hinges allowed it to swing up. The shaft beneath was a black void. The detention area, Calvin said. How many guards? Stokes doesn't use traditional guards. He controls through fear and dependency. The people down there, they're broken. Years of isolation and manipulation. They won't fight you, but they might not help either. They've been conditioned to believe that escape means death, that Stokes is the only thing keeping them alive. And Mason? Theo's expression softened. Stokes kept him in his private quarters, probably. That's in the main complex, East Wing. But to get there, you'll have to go through the detention area, then through what he calls the workshop, where he had his people building and manufacturing his equipment. Calvin absorbed this. The flood valve. Detention area, south wall. Big red wheel, hard to miss. Turn it clockwise to close it, counterclockwise opens it. Right now it's closed, but it's not locked. Stokes can open it any time. So I secure the valve, free the hostages, then go for Mason. That's the plan. But Brewer, Theo grabbed his arm. Stokes isn't just crazy. He's smart. He'll have contingencies. If you get spotted before you're ready, if things go sideways, you need to be prepared to make hard choices. Calvin met his eyes. I'm prepared. Theo studied him for a moment, then nodded and handed over a backpack. Bolt cutters for the cell locks. Zip ties in case you need to restrain anyone. And this, he pulled out a handgun. I know you're not a cop, and I know this complicates things legally, but down there, you might need it. Calvin had fired guns before, on hunting trips with friends from work. He wasn't comfortable with them, but he wasn't completely ignorant either. He took the weapon, checked the safety, and tucked it into his waistband. One more thing, Theo said. He pulled out a USB drive. Everything I know about Stokes' operation is on here. Names of victims, dates, photographs I managed to take before I escaped. If something happens to you, this goes to the media. But if you make it out, you and your son, you use this to make sure Stokes never sees daylight again. Calvin pocketed the drive. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might not make it out. And if you don't, I'm going to disappear again, and all of this becomes just another conspiracy theory. I'll make it out. Theo stepped back, 40 feet down. Then follow the corridor east. You'll see a door marked A7. That's the detention area. Good luck. Calvin lowered himself into the shaft, his boots finding the first rung. It held. He descended slowly, testing each grip point. The red flashlight clenched between his teeth. The walls were concrete, damp with condensation. The air smelled of earth and chemicals. 30 feet. 20 feet. 10. His boots hit solid ground. Calvin pulled the flashlight from his mouth and swept the beam around. The corridor was exactly as Theo described, narrow, utilitarian, with exposed pipes running along the ceiling. To his right, the corridor ended in a sealed door. To his left, it stretched into darkness, toward the detention area. Calvin started moving, every sense alert. The gun pressed against his back, a reminder of how far he'd fallen from his normal life. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern was tiled backsplash options. Now he was armed and breaking into an underground prison. The door marked A7 appeared ahead, industrial gray with a small window of reinforced glass. Calvin peered through. The detention area was larger than he'd expected, maybe 40 feet across, with a dozen cell doors lining the walls. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows. In the center of the room stood the flood valve, exactly where Theo said it would be, a large red wheel mounted to a pipe assembly. Calvin saw no one moving. The cells appeared occupied. He could make out shapes and cots through the small window slots in each door, but everyone seemed to be sleeping. He tried the door handle. Unlocked. Calvin slipped inside, moving quickly to the valve. He grabbed the wheel with both hands and tested it. It turned easily, too easily. His blood ran cold. The valve was already partially open. A voice echoed from speakers mounted in the ceiling. I was wondering when you'd arrive, Calvin. Reginald Stokes. Calvin froze, searching for cameras. He spotted them, small lenses in the corners, covering every angle. "You're more resourceful than I gave you credit for," Reginald continued, his voice calm, almost amused. "Theodore, I assume? I always suspected he survived the flood last time I tested the system. He was always the clever one. Last time." The casual way Reginald said it made Calvin's skin crawl. "Where's Mason?" Calvin demanded. "Safe. With me. Unlike the 11 souls currently locked in those cells. You know, Calvin, I've been thinking about your situation. You want your son. I want my freedom. Perhaps we can make a deal." "No deals. Let him go. Turn around and look at the cells." "Look closely." Calvin did. As his eyes adjusted, he realized what he was seeing. The people in those cells weren't sleeping. They were awake, staring at him with hollow, terrified eyes. And each one had a metal collar around their neck, connected to a cable that ran to the back wall. "Explosive collars," Reginald said. "Radio controlled. If I trigger them, or if the signal is interrupted, say, by a SWAT team's RF jammers, they detonate. It's crude, but effective. The collars were a contingency I hoped never to use, but you forced my hand." Calvin's mind raced. Theo hadn't known about this. "So here's my offer," Reginald continued. "You're going to call your friends and the police. You're going to tell them to stand down. You're going to ensure I have safe passage to my exit tunnel. And in exchange, once I'm clear, I'll release the collar codes to you remotely. Everyone lives. Including Mason? Mason comes with me. He's my grandson, Calvin. My heir. I'll raise him properly. Teach him what you never could. In 20 years, he'll thank me." Calvin's hands tightened on the valve wheel. "And if I refuse? Then I flood the detention area, killing these 11 people. Then I trigger the collars anyway, just to make a point. Then I take Mason and leave through my exit while you drown in guilt. Your choice, Calvin. Be a hero and lose everything, or be practical and save some lives." Calvin looked at the faces in the cells. 11 people who'd been tortured, imprisoned, broken. 11 people Theo had risked everything to help. 11 people who were now bargaining chips in a monster's game. He thought about what Theo had said. "I want him to suffer. I want him to know what it's like to lose everything, to be helpless." Calvin looked up at the nearest camera and smiled. "Reginald, I think you've forgotten something important about me." "And what's that?" "I'm a construction foreman. I understand infrastructure. I understand engineering. And I understand that a man as paranoid as you wouldn't put all his eggs in one basket." Calvin started walking toward the cells, still talking. "Those collars? They're connected to a relay, probably in your control room. The flood valve? Same thing, you've got override controls. Everything runs through your central system. Get to your point." Calvin reached the first cell door and pulled out the bolt cutters. "My point is that systems can fail, especially when someone who understands them decides to make them fail." He cut through the lock. The door swung open. The man inside, gaunt, maybe 50, stared at him in shock. "Stay calm," Calvin told him. "We're getting you out." "Calvin, what are you doing?" Reginald's voice had lost its composure. "Calling your bluff." Calvin moved to the next cell. Another lock cut, another door opened. "You're not going to kill these people. You're not going to trigger those collars. You know what? Enlighten me." Calvin finished the third cell and started on the fourth. The freed prisoners stayed in their cells, too conditioned or too scared to move, but they were listening. "Because you're a builder, just like me. You spent 8 years creating this place. You recruited these people, your word, not mine, because you needed their skills. You've invested too much time, too much money, too much ego into this project to destroy it out of spite. You want to survive this. You want your legacy intact." Silence from the speakers. Calvin freed the 6th prisoner. "But more than that, you're a coward. You're a man who preys on the vulnerable, who hides behind money and contingency plans, who takes children as insurance because you can't face the consequences of your own actions. And cowards don't martyr themselves. They run. I have your son." Reginald's voice cracked with rage. "I know, and I'm coming for him. But first, I'm going to save these people. Then I'm going to shut down your systems. Then I'm going to drag you out of whatever hole you're hiding in. And I'm going to make sure you pay for every single day you stole from them." Calvin freed the last cell. 11 prisoners, now loose but still collared, stared at him with a mixture of hope and terror. "Everyone out," Calvin said. "Single file. We're leaving through the maintenance corridor." "The collars," one woman stammered, "are a bluff. If he was going to detonate them, He would have already. Calvin pointed to the door he'd entered through. Move. Now. They moved, slowly at first, then faster as the reality of freedom began to penetrate their conditioned fear. Calvin herded them toward the corridor, watching the cameras, waiting for Reginald to make his move. The speakers crackled. You've made a terrible mistake. Probably. I'm good at those. Calvin was the last one through the detention area door. He pulled it shut behind him and jammed bolt cutters through the handle, sealing it. Not permanent, but it would slow anyone coming from the main complex. In the corridor, the freed prisoners clustered together, 11 ghosts in dirty work clothes, blinking in the red light of Calvin's flashlight. Listen to me, Calvin said. I need you to climb up through the ventilation shaft. It's 40 feet. There are rungs. At the top, a man named Theodore Downs is waiting. He'll get you clear. Can you do that? What about you? Asked the gaunt man from the first cell. What about the other one? The boy. I'm going back for him, but I need you safe first. Go. They went, moving like automatons, years of following orders overriding their fear. Calvin watched them climb, one by one, disappearing into the shaft. When the last one started up, Calvin checked his watch. He'd been underground for 17 minutes. SWAT would have moved by now, either to the mill or to prepare the storm drain breach. Mathis would be going insane trying to figure out where he was. Calvin pulled out his phone. Surprisingly, he had one bar of signal. Reginald's facility must have boosters for his own communications. He typed a quick text to Mathis. In the facility. Hostages freed, heading to ventilation shaft in the woods. Mason still inside. Need 15 minutes before you breach. He sent it, not waiting for a reply. Then he turned and headed deeper into the complex, toward the main area where Reginald waited with his son. The corridor opened into what Theo had called the workshop. Calvin had expected something crude, improvised. Instead, he found himself in a space that looked like a legitimate manufacturing floor. CNC machines, 3D printers, assembly benches, all illuminated by industrial lighting. Parts and components filled shelves along the walls. This wasn't a prepper's bunker. This was a production facility. Calvin moved through it carefully, every nerve alert. Reginald could be anywhere, could be watching through cameras, could be preparing another trap. A door at the far end stood partially open, lights spilling through. Calvin approached it, the gun now in his hand, safety off. He pushed through into a control room that belonged in a science fiction movie. Monitors lined every wall, showing camera feeds from throughout the facility and the grounds above. In the center, a desk held computer equipment, communication gear, and a large panel with switches and indicators. And in a chair, facing the monitors, sat Reginald Stokes. He didn't turn around. The police are breaching the storm drain as we speak, Reginald said quietly. Your captain is quite predictable. They should hit the western wall in approximately 8 minutes. Calvin kept the gun trained on him. Where's Mason? Safe room. Through that door, down the hall, last door on the right. Reinforced steel, combination lock. He's watching cartoons on a tablet, completely unaware of the drama unfolding. Reginald finally turned, and Calvin saw a man who'd aged a decade in hours. I'm not a monster, Calvin. You kidnapped 11 people. You forced them to work. You threatened to kill them. I saved them, gave them purpose. Society had thrown them away. I gave them value. Yes, I restricted their freedom, but freedom is an illusion anyway. We're all enslaved to something. Reginald gestured at the monitors. I built something extraordinary here. A completely self-sufficient ecosystem. Solar and geothermal power. Hydroponic food production. Water reclamation. This facility could sustain 30 people indefinitely. Do you understand what that means? I understand you're insane. I'm practical. The world is collapsing, Calvin. Climate change, political instability, economic inequality. Within our lifetimes, society will fracture. When it does, places like this will be the only refuge. I was preparing for that future. Calvin moved closer, the gun steady. By enslaving people. By creating a new order. Those 11 were the foundation. I was going to expand, recruit more qualified individuals, build a true underground society. Mason would have been part of the new generation, raised to understand what survival really means. You're not keeping my son. No, Reginald agreed sadly. I suppose I'm not. You've won, Calvin. The police are coming. The facility will be compromised. My work is over. He stood slowly, hands visible. Before they arrive, Before this all ends, I want you to understand something. I don't want to understand anything from you." Elaine knew. Not everything. Not about the workers, but she knew about the facility. She helped with supplies, with logistics. She supported my vision because she understood that I was trying to protect our family's future. When she had Mason, when she married you, I saw it as an opportunity. You're skilled, practical, strong. I thought eventually you'd understand. I thought you'd join us." Calvin's hand trembled. She knew. For years. She's running now because she knows what's coming. Prison, lawsuits, public crucifixion. She chose survival over loyalty, just like I taught her. Reginald smiled sadly. "We're not so different, you and I. We both do whatever it takes to protect our children. We're nothing alike. Keep telling yourself that." Reginald glanced at one of the monitors. "Your SWAT team just hit the wall. They'll be through in 3 minutes. I suggest you get Mason and leave." The combination is July 19th, 17. His birthday. Calvin backed toward the door Reginald had indicated, keeping the gun trained on the old man. "Calvin," Reginald called. "When they write about this, when the media tears me apart and calls me a monster, remember that I was trying to save people. Remember that my intentions were good." "The road to hell," Calvin said. He found the safe room exactly where Reginald said it would be. Through a small window in the steel door, he could see Mason sitting on a cot, tablet in his hands, completely absorbed in whatever he was watching. Safe. Whole. Unaware. Calvin's hands shook as he entered the combination. July 19th, 17, the lock clicked. The door opened. Mason looked up, and his face transformed with relief and joy. "Dad." Calvin holstered the gun and scooped his son into his arms, holding him so tightly he was afraid he might hurt him. Mason was solid, real, alive. "We're going home, buddy," Calvin whispered into his son's hair. Behind them, somewhere in the facility, came the sound of explosions and shouting. SWAT had breached. It was over. Almost. The next hours passed in a blur. SWAT teams swept through the facility, securing rooms, documenting evidence. EMTs checked Mason, physically fine, just scared and confused. Calvin refused to let him out of his sight, staying close even when the paramedics insisted on checking Calvin too. Captain Mathis found him sitting on the back of an ambulance, Mason asleep against his shoulder, wrapped in an emergency blanket. "You're lucky you're not in handcuffs," she said, but her tone lacked real anger. "Did you get Reginald?" "In custody." He didn't resist. Frankly, he seemed relieved. Mathis sat down next to him. "The 11 people you freed, they're all being treated. Medical exams, debriefing. It's going to take time, but they'll recover. You saved them, Mr. Brewer." "I had help." Theodore Downs. "We found him at the ventilation shaft with the hostages. He's talking now, giving us everything. Names, dates, crimes. Between his testimony and the evidence we're collecting from the facility, Reginald Stokes will never see freedom again." Calvin nodded, too exhausted to feel satisfaction. "Your wife," Mathis continued carefully. "Canadian authorities picked her up at the border. She's being extradited. Based on what Downs is telling us about her involvement, she'll be facing serious charges." Calvin looked down at Mason's sleeping face. "What happens now?" "Now? You go home. Get your son settled. Tomorrow, you'll need to give a full statement about everything that happened. We'll need to understand your decision-making process, the contact with Downs, your entry into the facility. It's going to be complicated. Am I going to be charged?" Mathis was quiet for a moment. "That's above my pay grade. You broke a lot of laws tonight, Mr. Brewer. You interfered with an active operation, entered a crime scene, destroyed evidence, carried an illegal weapon. Any prosecutor could make a case. But you also saved 11 lives and your son. You took action when legal options were too slow. A good lawyer will argue temporary insanity, duress, immediate necessity. And honestly, most juries will sympathize with a father fighting to save his child." She stood. "Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow." Calvin carried Mason to his truck. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Police vehicles still surrounded the property, technicians moving in and out of the house, but the immediate crisis had passed. As he buckled Mason into the back seat, his son stirred and opened his eyes. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy. Is Grandpa in trouble?" Calvin's throat tightened. "Yeah, he did some bad things." "What about Mom?" The question hit harder than any punch could have. Calvin had no idea how to answer it. How did you explain betrayal to a 7-year-old? How did you tell your son that his mother had chosen to protect a monster? Mom made some mistakes, Calvin said finally. Big ones. She's going to have to face consequences for them. But we're okay? You and me. Calvin looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw fear and confusion, but also trust. Mason trusted him to make this right, to keep them safe, to navigate the impossibility of what came next. We're going to be okay, Calvin promised. It'll be hard, and things are going to be different, but we'll get through it together. Mason nodded and closed his eyes again. Calvin drove them home as the sun rose higher. Their house looked the same. The renovation materials still scattered in the driveway, the kitchen still half finished. But everything had changed. He was a single father now, raising his son alone. He'd face legal questions, media attention, maybe even prosecution. His marriage was over. His family was destroyed. But Mason was safe. Calvin carried his sleeping son inside and laid him in his own bed for the first time in days. He stood there for a long moment, watching him breathe, still hardly believing it was over. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Thank you, Theo. Calvin started to reply, then stopped. What was there to say? They'd both been changed by what happened in that underground hell. They'd both crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Instead, Calvin pulled out the USB drive Theo had given him. He plugged it into his laptop and opened the files. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Documentation of every prisoner, every day of their captivity. Detailed logs of Reginald's construction process, supply purchases, communications. And something else, files labeled insurance. Calvin opened one. His blood ran cold. The photos showed Mason in the facility, dated over 3 years. Mason at 4, 5, 6 years old, playing in what looked like an underground rec room, eating at a table with other children, sleeping in a cell. Reginald had been conditioning his grandson for years, gradually introducing him to the facility, normalizing it, building a relationship that would have eventually led to Mason becoming part of the compound permanently. And there were other children in the photos. Children Calvin didn't recognize. Children whose parents were probably powerful, wealthy, influential. All potential leverage, all potential insurance for Reginald's operations. Calvin felt rage building again, hotter than before. The rescue was over, but this was bigger than one madman's bunker. This was a network, a system, possibly involving other people. He spent the next 6 hours going through every file, making notes, cross-referencing names and dates. By the time Mason woke up, Calvin had identified at least 7 families who'd sent children to visit Grandfather Stokes over the years. Some were politicians. Some were business leaders. Some were judges. Mason appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. Dad, can I have breakfast? Calvin closed the laptop. Of course, buddy. What do you want? Pancakes. Calvin smiled. Pancakes it is. As he made breakfast, something simple, something normal, Calvin made his decision. He would cooperate with the authorities. He would give his statement. He would face whatever legal consequences came his way. But he would also make sure everyone involved in Reginald's network faced justice. The full USB drive would go to the FBI. The media would get copies. Every family who'd been complicit, every person who'd enabled or benefited from Reginald's operation would be exposed. Reginald had said they were alike, both willing to do whatever it took to protect their children. He was wrong. Reginald had protected his vision, his legacy, his ego. He'd sacrificed innocent people for his paranoid fantasies. Calvin would protect his son by ensuring monsters like Reginald never had power again. The pancakes were ready. Mason ate enthusiastically, chattering about wanting to see his friends at school, asking if they could finish the kitchen renovation soon. Normal conversation from a boy who'd been through something abnormal. Calvin's phone rang. Captain Mathis. Mr. Brewer, I need you to come down to the station. Today, if possible. I'll be there this afternoon. I'm getting Mason settled first. Understood. Also, you should know, we've been going through the facility computers. What we're finding, this is going to be bigger than we thought. Federal agencies are getting involved. You might want to get a lawyer. I will. But Captain, there's something you need to know. Calvin glanced at Mason, who was absorbed in his pancakes. I have additional evidence. A lot of it. It implicates other people, people with resources and connections. When I come in, I'm bringing everything. A pause. Mr. Brewer, if you have evidence of other crimes, You need to preserve chain of custody. Don't copy it. Don't distribute it. Bring it directly to us. I will. But I'm also making backup copies. Because I have a feeling some powerful people are going to want this buried. We'll protect the evidence. I hope so. See you this afternoon. Calvin hung up and watched his son eat. 7 years old, and his life had been invaded by evil he couldn't comprehend. But he was resilient. Kids were resilient. With time, therapy, love, Mason would heal. And Calvin would make sure he grew up in a world where the Reginald Stokes types didn't win. The road ahead would be hard. Legal battles, custody issues, media scrutiny, rebuilding their lives from the wreckage of Elaine's betrayal. But they would survive. Because that's what Calvin Brewer did. He built things. Strong foundations. Solid structures. Lives that could weather any storm. Starting with this kitchen. Starting with these pancakes. Starting now. 3 months later, Calvin sat in a federal courtroom, watching as the judge read the verdict. Reginald Stokes, guilty on all counts. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, forced labor, weapons charges, conspiracy. The sentence would be delivered next week, but the prosecutor was asking for life without parole. Reginald showed no emotion as he was led away. He'd maintained throughout the trial that his intentions were pure, that history would vindicate him. The jury had disagreed in less than 2 hours. Elaine's trial was scheduled for next month. Her lawyer was negotiating a plea deal, testimony against her father in exchange for a reduced sentence. Calvin would have custody of Mason regardless of the outcome. The divorce papers had been filed weeks ago. The 11 freed prisoners sat in the gallery, watching justice unfold. Theo sat with them, thin but recovering, his testimony having been crucial to the prosecution. He caught Calvin's eye and nodded. Outside the courthouse, media waited. The case had become national news. The underground bunker, the enslaved workers, the network of wealthy families who'd sent their children to visit. 7 other arrests had been made, though most of those cases were still pending. Calvin avoided the cameras and went home, where his sister was watching Mason. She'd moved in temporarily to help while Calvin dealt with the legal chaos. Their mother had offered too, but Calvin had declined. He needed to do this himself, to prove he could be the father Mason needed. How'd it go? His sister asked. Guilty. All counts. She hugged him. Good. That monster deserves to rot. Mason ran up. Dad, can we finish the kitchen now? Please. Calvin laughed. The renovation had been on hold for months, but maybe it was time. Maybe getting back to normal, or as normal as they could manage, was exactly what they needed. Yeah, buddy. We can finish the kitchen. That night, after Mason went to bed, Calvin sat on the back porch with a beer and looked up at the stars. His phone buzzed. A text from Theo. I'm leaving tomorrow. Starting over somewhere new. Thank you for everything. Calvin typed back. Good luck. You deserve a fresh start. The response came quickly. So do you. Don't let this define you. Calvin thought about that. Everything that had happened, the rescue, the trial, the destruction of his marriage, it would always be part of him. But it didn't have to define him. He could build something new, something better. He could be the father Mason needed, the man he wanted to be. The next morning, Calvin and Mason drove to the hardware store for kitchen supplies. As they loaded tiles and grout into the cart, Mason asked, Dad, are we going to be okay? Like really okay? Calvin knelt down to his son's level. We're going to be better than okay. We're going to be great. It'll take time, and some days will be hard, but we've got each other. That's what matters. What about Mom? Calvin chose his words carefully. Mom made choices that hurt people. She's going to pay for those choices. But that doesn't change the fact that she's your mom, and she loves you. When she's done with her legal stuff, if you want to see her, we'll figure it out together. Mason nodded, processing. Can we still see Aunt Sarah? Of course. Anytime you want. They finished the renovation over the next 2 weeks. Working together, father and son, laying tile, painting cabinets, installing new fixtures. It wasn't perfect. Calvin was a construction foreman, not a finish carpenter, but it was theirs. On the day they finished, Calvin made dinner in the new kitchen. Just pasta and sauce, nothing fancy. But they ate together at their table in their house, and for the first time in months, it felt like home. Mason went to bed happy. Calvin cleaned up, then sat at the kitchen island with his laptop. The USB drive from Theo still held secrets, files the FBI was still processing. But Calvin's part was done. He'd testified. He'd cooperated. He'd done his duty. Now he could focus on healing. His phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Calvin Brewer? A woman's voice, professional. My name is Madeline Riddle. I'm a producer for a major network. We're doing a documentary about the Stokes case, and we'd like to interview you. Calvin had fielded dozens of these calls. He declined them all. I'm not interested in being on television. I understand. But Mr. Brewer, this isn't about sensationalism. It's about telling the story of those 11 people who suffered, about exposing the systems that allowed this to happen. Your role in the rescue was necessary and complicated, and I don't want to profit from it. We're not asking you to profit. We're asking you to help make sure this never happens again. To show people what evil looks like when it wears a respectable face. Calvin thought about Reginald, about his calm voice and rational arguments, about how he genuinely believed he was building something good. I'll think about it, Calvin said. That's all I ask. I'll send you more information. No pressure. After she hung up, Calvin sat in the quiet kitchen and considered. Maybe telling the story would help. Maybe it would give the survivors a voice. Maybe it would prevent another Reginald Stokes from building another hell. Or maybe it would just reopen wounds. He decided he'd ask Theo and the others. If they wanted to speak out, he'd support them. If they wanted privacy, he'd respect that. For now, he had a son to raise, a life to rebuild, and a future to create. Reginald had been wrong about the world collapsing. Society had its problems, sure, but it also had good people. People like Captain Mathis and her team. People like Theo, who'd risked everything to help strangers. People like Calvin's sister, who'd dropped everything to support her brother. The world wasn't ending. It was just changing the way it always had. And Calvin Brewer would change with it, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one step at a time. In his room, Mason slept soundly, safe and loved. That was victory enough. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.